So I think, okay, so I'm going to put everybody in the attendees. Change role. Glenn, it's so good to see you.
Hi, Joey.
Hi. Okay.
Great.
Awesome. So we are up and going. And hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, Filmarket Hub and Roadmap Writers. It's excited to present this to you all. Just before we start, can everybody hear and see me and Rosalind okay? Yes? Okay, cool. Awesome, awesome. Rosalind's in the, is that still the UK, your town?
No, I'm not. I'm actually from, I'm zooming in from Menorca tonight, but I'm normally in the UK.
I'd even heard of that place before.
It's a little island.
Okay. She's like, I'm in New York. No, but so this is how it's going to go. We have 4 amazing panelists today. And this is so interesting because I mean, I know for me, I'm not so savvy in like international production, but it's becoming more and more popular and interesting to me. So when Rosalind and I and Jorge were bringing this together, we're like, this is such a cool idea for filmmakers from the UK, from Europe, from America, Australia, to figure out how to like work with different territories. It's interesting. Rosalind, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about Filmarket Hub?
Sure. So Filmarket Hub, we're an international online marketplace for curated films and series in development. And we matchmake projects in development with producers, TV executives, production companies, sales agents, and distributors. We've got an international database of professionals from all over, mainly Europe and Latin America, over 30,000 international professionals. And we also run script competitions and we do online pitch events. So do check us out.
Look at this. New Forest, UK, Scotland, Los Angeles, Kansas, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Kent,
Wow.
Sweden, Arizona, New York. Oh my God, so interesting. South Africa. Oh, that's cool. Awesome. I'm Joey Tuccio. I'm the CEO of Roadmap Writers. We are a training service for writers. India. Oh my God, this is crazy. And we have a lot of programs taught by execs and Roadmap team members to teach our writers not only how to develop their scripts, but how to get it out there. We just had our 194th writer signed. We've had about 80 writers option produced and staffed. A lot of them getting their first staffing job through Roadmap that they haven't even set foot in a writer's room before. So it's really exciting. But what's even more exciting than that, than me, are these amazing panelists. So what's going to happen is this. I'm going to bring them. Rosalind is going to introduce the UK centric execs. I will introduce the American centric execs. And then we have some questions prepared. So I'll be moderating this session today. And maybe like 20 minutes to 30 minutes in, if you all want to start typing your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box, but in the Q&A box where everybody's typing in where they're from, put your questions in the Q&A box so things don't get lost. I don't think you can actually see, the attendees can see what everybody's typing to each other. So I just made it live so you can see everything. But no weird things. If it starts getting weird in the chat room, I will deactivate it. But questions in the Q&A box. And at the end, if time permits, I will ask vetted questions from there. So yeah, let's get started. Rosalind, if you want to bring in the first, you want to introduce the first one, I'll bring him in.
Wonderful. I think we're representing UK. First off, we've got Carlo Dusi. Should we bring in Carlo?
Yeah. Let me bring him in now.
Hello.
Here we go. Just promoted him.
Is he in the room yet?
Yeah, he's gonna come in a sec.
Okay. Well, we've got people from the Ukraine here. It's amazing.
Yeah, cool.
Hello.
Hello, Carlo. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Just a little introduction about Carlo. Carlo is the exec producer and strategy director of Endor Productions, where he's also exec producing projects he initiated. Previously, he led commercial strategy across the whole of Red Arrow Studios' international scripted production and co-production business, where he exec produced 2 seasons of Vienna Blood and 2 seasons of Departure. And before that, he was head of business and commercial affairs for Ridley Scott's UK company, Scott Free Films, where he exec produced the BAFTA and Emmy-winning TV hit Taboo starring Tom Hardy. And he's previously run his own film finance production consulting business under Aria Films. He's also a voting member of BAFTA and BIFTA. So we are in exceptionally good hands with Carlo with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. And also, second up, we have award-winning producer, Alex Boden. So should we welcome Alex?
He's coming in now.
Hello, Alex. Just wait.
Hello there, hi.
Hello, welcome.
Hello.
So Alex, I'm going to try and introduce you. Award-winning producer who specializes in international co-productions and co-productions. And when I mention a few of his credits, you'll understand why. Alex is the chair of the Production Guild of Great Britain. He's a voting member of BAFTA, the European Film Academy, and the Production Guild of US. He's currently producing an adaptation of the crime thriller Tokyo Vice for HBO Max in Japan, which he filmed during lockdown in Japan. He's also in production of The Lost Planet, directed by Terrence Malick. Previous credits include the Netflix fantasy adventure series Cursed, the groundbreaking Netflix series Sense8, shot in 17 cities globally, as well as the fantasy epic Cloud Atlas, and amongst other epic credits, Pulp, Intrigo, and The Holding. And he's also a board member and mentor at Stowe Story Lab. So a warm welcome to you, Alex, from London tonight, as well as Carlo. It's lovely to have you both with us.
Thank you so much.
Alex, how do you not have jet lag? I would be asleep for 5 years if I just came back from Japan. Props to you. Amazing. Okay, so now we're going to travel to the United States, and I'm going to bring in Janet Jeffries. I think we lost her in the, okay, actually I want to bring in Glen Geller. And Glen is so awesome to see Glen for the first time. I've known him for a little bit, and he's done a lot of stuff, great stuff with our writers. Glen Geller joined Howard Gordon and Alex Ganso's production company that's based at Sony TV in 2019 and oversees their TV slate. Glen also served as the VP and the president of CBS Entertainment, overseeing the development and production of projects like Young Sheldon, Bull, Jane the Virgin, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Mom, The Good Wife, How I Met Your Mother, and Under the Dome. So it's so great to have you, Glen. And let me find Janet in the throng of attendees. Janet, if you could just announce yourself in the chat box. Maybe you came in when I put you as a panelist as another name. Let's see really quickly. This is what you call stretching. Let's see, let me actually just check here for a sec. Oops, see in here. Let me just see. Well, okay, while Janet, I'm trying to find Janet in here. Why don't we get started and then we'll bring Janet in as oops, sorry, I did this back, so I put you back to attendees. Okay, so why don't we get started? The main thing is, since this is about co-productions internationally, why don't we start with, can you explain to us briefly, what is an international co-production? And again, anybody could start.
I mean, I guess if I can jump in just to set the scene, the main question I would ask back to you is, whether we want to talk about co-productions of fact, or whether we want to talk about actual official co-productions and the treaty, because there's a difference between the two of them, and they're all equally valid, but they kind of follow different rules. So on the one side, there's a whole number of international treaties that various countries worldwide, Canada is, you know, the leader in that space, have entered into with one another in order to allow producers from those territories to make content together, which then qualifies as national content in each of the participating territories, and co-producing officially under one of those treaties, or here in Europe, the European Convention. Actually, I shouldn't say here in Europe because I'm in the UK and that no longer applies to us, but my heart is still with it. Coming under one of those treaties, or where it applies the European Convention, will allow you to qualify in turn for the subsidies and incentives and other support available to filmmaking, television making, depending on the scope of the treaty in that particular country. And so you can maximize access to those subsidies by doing so across multiple territories if you qualify as an official co-production. But alongside that, there's a whole host of co-productions of fact where, at the moment at Endor, we have one UK-Canadian co-development, which we're structuring under treaty, but we're also co-producing 3 projects with other companies where the treaties are not relevant to us. What the co-productions enabled us to do was actually to bring either pieces of talent or IP or finance from different parties, across different territories, and really create a situation where there's strength in numbers and we create the strongest possible package that we then take out to the market. And in that case, there's no body of rules necessarily that you need to follow, other than the fact that there's an understanding industry-wise as to the kind of commercial principles that will follow a joining of forces where each of the parties brings certain valuable elements to the table, and inevitably you might end up spending a little bit of time trying to allocate the right amount of value to each of the elements each of the parties brings to the table to figure out how to slice the pie when you're actually making something together in that context. So the two worlds to me are quite different, because one, the latter one is much simpler and not defined by actual legislation, whereas the former one is quite technical in terms of the rules you need to follow, but they're each as important to our activity as content creators. And certainly from my side, we come across both models and both realities all the time.
That's amazing. I feel like this is really interesting, because I feel like writers, I'm just to speak from like my point of view with American writers, is that the idea of going to UK companies, Australian companies, European companies, it's so, for no pun intended, foreign to them, because it's such a unique world. So this is really great. Do you all see like an incline in co-production needs? Do you feel like more companies are going to the co-international production route?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the very simple answer for why co-produce sort of comes back to the fact of, well, can you make it in your own country? And increasingly, with the market the way that it is, you can't. And some countries have been pushing this angle for many years. They've been encouraging their producers and production companies to go out and partner up with other productions internationally to do international co-productions, because that way you've got a chance of getting 100% of your finance together rather than getting stuck at 60, 70, 80, wherever it might get you to. So it's that simple bare bones idea of this is one way to actually get something made, rather than touting it around and having it on the slate for years. That is I think the most compelling reason. And with the industry the way it is and the market the way it is at the moment, it's there's never been a more urgent time to look at the possibility of bringing in partners who can bring finance, talent, cultural angles, translation, language, whatever it might be, to your project, as Carlo did earlier.
I hate to be a little cheesy, but it's interesting how like the world is kind of in its own right falling apart in some instances, but like the entertainment industry is bridging it together. Janet is back. She had a little internet snafu. So let me bring her in. And we will keep going. Hey, Janet.
Hi, sorry about that. I'm at the fancy house and it's the terrible internet. I apologize.
No worries.
Terrible.
She's at Lauren Spender's house, which is amazing. So just quickly, Janet Jeffries, who I adore, is a development and production exec working in both features and television for Lauren Spender Productions and Bender Brown TV Productions. Lawrence's credits include Greta, Hacksaw Ridge, Martin Scorsese's film Silence, Good Will Hunting, and Inconvenient Truth, Pulp Fiction, Inglourious Bastards, the Netflix limited series 7 Seconds, the Starz limited series Flesh and Bone, and the current CW series Roswell, New Mexico. They also produced Capone, starring Tom Hardy, and the upcoming Netflix original series feature, The Harder They Fall. So, hi, Janet. Good to have you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you.
So we were just talking a little bit about like the overall kind of umbrella view of what an international co-production is. So we're gonna go to the next one is, how do these projects typically originate and what is the benefit? Let's start with this. What is the benefit of a co-production model?
Is that for me? Oh,
Anybody, yeah.
oh, great. Sorry.
Hey,
Well,
Janet.
for us as, thank you. For us as producers, it makes a lot of sense because it frees us up as to what we want to take on, where we want to shoot, a lot of the relationships that we've established globally with talent. A lot of times our material does tend to speak to an international audience, I think. So we tend to have a lot of great relationships with talent that is abroad. So for instance, Joey had mentioned as part of the credits was Greta. That was Neil Jordan. Let me tell you, like his outreach in in Ireland was spectacular for a New York-based movie to pretty much 80% of it or maybe more shot in Ireland. For a New York-based movie, you're not doing so bad. So that was very beneficial for us to be able to even make the movie on any kind of budget, to be able to then sell it and distribute it internationally. But it was most helpful. So for us as producers, it frees us up to be able to do things that if you're looking, okay, you want to do a movie set in New York, it's going to definitely cost you a lot more than doing something that's a co-production with all of the great things that the other talent can bring to the table, that you, through our established relationships, just being in the international and indie space forever and ever, that it's always been based on sales and putting things together with talent and going out to sales companies, which we have most of our stuff doing it that way. Even television, we're working a lot in that space. Roswell isn't, but all the other things, Netflix is a global entity, so we definitely try and use them as a platform. But yes, so for us, it frees us up to not feel that we can't do a project or that this project may be too expensive to not be able to find a home. Using these co-productions, it allows us to look at things in a really global, international way. And that works very well for us and has.
And I guess Glenn and Alex, how do you see international co-production in the TV space?
Well, I haven't spoken yet, so I feel like I need to answer the fourth question regardless of what it is. I just wanted to say that for us, projects come to us. You were asking about how do these things come together. Howard Gordon and Alex Ganza have an international, Homeland was such an international show that they have respect from, creatives all over the world. And so we have a deal based at Sony. So a lot of people come to us as a way to get their projects made. Obviously, the studio uses us in the same regard. We have something that's going out very soon. We just sold a project that I actually thought would have been closed before this because it was supposed to be announced last week, that I can't announce on this platform, but that it's a really big deal for them to have Howard and Alex as a part of the show. But, not just with projects coming to us, but in that particular show, we had a very specific interest, and there's no way anybody would have made the show here in the States. Even on an international platform like Netflix or Amazon, even if we took it to one of those places, they never would have bought that kind of show. So we actually got to express a real creative desire and say to Sony, we're interested in making this international co-production, find us partners, because we have a very specific interest in this kind of show. So we never would have gotten them made, even with, the pedigree of Alex and Howard.
Interesting. Really cool. And okay, next question. By the way, I'm seeing a lot of questions from the audience right now. So great questions. We'll hold off for now. But thank you for the questions. What are some of the added challenges? I mean, understanding now more about like the importance of financial help from different territories, but what are some of the challenges that come with the process? I'm sure kind of every territory wants to put their kind of thumbprint on things, but what would you say is the biggest challenges?
Where to begin?
Let's start with cultural.
Definitely.
Cultural.
Well,
Start
cultural is
there, Alex.
most rewarding as well as the biggest challenge, I think, because on the one hand, like we've just been in Tokyo, in Japan, which is somewhere I've always wanted to film, and the reason it's taken me many years to get there is because it's so incredibly hard filming in places where maybe they aren't used to co-producing, or where there's a different expectation of what production really means. Or you're allowed to do different things by the government or by the ministry, or in terms of it. So there are so many. It's such a big journey, really. But at the key of all of this is, of course, communication. So that's the most important thing, just in terms of making sure that you are in constant communication. This is also, of course, assuming you've chosen the right person to be co-producing with. That choice of that person who you'll be working with for 2, 3, 4, 5 more years is the paramount decision you'll make, and getting that right is key. But then because they're the person who will help you to bridge that cultural gap, especially if it is a country that you as a producer don't know as well as they do. So you're very reliant on that person or that company, and you're reliant on them as human beings. You're reliant on them as experienced producers. You're reliant on them as ambassadors, as people who are connected into the network of their own country, and who are able to make things happen in the way that you together hopefully want to make them happen. So there's the there are many more things. I'll hand over to someone else, because I'm sure everyone's got their own personal, this is the biggest challenge, but that's definitely the one thing that you're taking on every time you do a co-production internationally.
And I think just picking up on what Alex was saying now, that importance of communicating clearly from the outset, so that you and your partners are actually making the same film or the same show, which sounds really easy, but actually very often you find you're on a journey where in reality, creatively, editorially, sometimes commercially, you have very different senses of what the end result should be. And that tension can be really damaging unless you actually address it and even it out from the beginning. So spending time properly talking through what the project is, what the expectation of each party's contributions is going to be, what the strategy is going to be, both creatively and commercially, at the outset, I think is really key, because you can jump in with a lot of enthusiasm where everyone is friends at the beginning, and actually find down the line that in fact the understanding of what was being made is very different, and that can be a producer level, but also certainly in high-end TV, you can have different broadcasters or different platforms brought to the table by the producers in different countries with very, very differing editorial positions, or you can have very different distributors on a feature film that have been sold a different version of the film that's being made, and suddenly find along the way that actually they're not really in line with what the end result might be. So making sure that community of vision from every level is evened out and shared from the outset is really important. And sometimes the cultural challenges that Glen was mentioning, that Alex were mentioning, also really come into play here.
Yeah, I think process can be, tricky. You kind of alluded to it, Carlo. Everyone starts out as friends at the beginning because everyone believes they have the exact same unique show they want to make. And then you discover that perhaps it's not exactly a shared common vision for the show. I think distance oddly is a big challenge, and it's cultural. I'll just wrap it under that umbrella, but it really is so different. Like, who has final say really has to be worked out. And that's easy to say when you get final say, to say, well, I'll just have final say. But, because everyone has a vested shared interest financially in this project, everyone does actually have real say. So just from a writer's standpoint, I think that part can be a little tricky. And then language as well. The show that I can't announce on this call, but that I would like to talk about will not be in English, but Howard and Alex only speak English. So while the stories will be broken in English with these writers, ultimately they are going to be written and aired in a language that is not native to us. And I think that takes an enormous amount of trust in that vision, because it makes a big difference I just know Alex and Howard, pour over every single word that's on the page. Well, ultimately, you just have to believe that the spirit of what you're trying to get across, of your character especially, is going to be translated beautifully into exactly how you would want it said. And there is just an enormous amount of trust in that process too.
So would you say it's safe to say that, let's say a project takes place in England and you have a UK-based production company, is it safe to say that those producers will kind of spearhead to create the creative development of the script because they have the authentic point of view? Or is it still very collaborative even if somebody hasn't even set foot in England?
It's completely contractual and it's very important that everything is completely laid out very clearly in terms of what everyone's responsibilities are, and that's I can't say that often enough, just in terms of the legal side to an international co-production is right at the heart of it, and is there for everyone's clarity. And the earlier you do that and have those conversations, the better, then everyone's on the same page. The UK producer could be there because they've got great access to locations. They could be there for a myriad of reasons. Because they've got finance. They aren't necessarily automatically by default the lead creative producer just because let's say the majority is being filmed in their country.
So now here's a question, because I deal a lot with writers, and so the next question you pretty much answered, like, do production companies have equal say? It's all contractual. But what about the writer? How much say does the writer have, and is that like still contractual, or can they kind of pop in every so often, or after it gets contractual with the production, the producers, they just step out completely?
I think that depends on project to project. And to be honest, I don't believe that changes whether the project is a co-production or not, other than the writer in a co-production may have more people to play off against one another if they really want to play the game. But ultimately, the position and the rights of the writer will be down to the deal, and that in turn will be down quite largely to the writer's stature in the market, whether it's their original concept or a piece of IP that they brought to the table, whether they've been paired up with something the producers brought to them. There's all sorts of factors that will influence how much power and how much creative say ultimately a writer will have. But I can't think of any that are specifically dependent on the co-production status or not of the particular project. I think that will be much more down to where the writer fits in the landscape of that particular project and what the origin of the project was.
Got it.
Yeah, I do think the ecosystem is different for every market. I think, at least from my point of view, internationally there tend to be more very creative executives attached to projects that traditionally, if it were just a local production, they would be the boss, essentially, and the writers would report to them. And for us, it's completely different. And so we just have to get used to being true partners with people that normally they would technically report to us. But as Alex kind of not so subtly hinted at, it really is contractual. Like, you have to figure that out before you start, because it could get messy later on.
Yeah.
And on our point of view, we're not writing producers. So for us, the writer, we are very much a combined team a lot of times, because when you're going to these co-productions, it's like you need as many balls in your court to go into this, because we don't know that other system, or I mean, for Lawrence, it's like he does know a lot, but you may just not know all the ins and outs of it. But we oftentimes partner up with our writers because we've worked so hard on the script that they oftentimes are then at this point an executive producer or something. So we need them, because we're not the writers ourselves. So we need them in our court. And at the point of putting together all these productions, I think anything anybody can bring to the table sometimes ends up being what you're called upon, or you look for, or see if there's something to bring in that could be helpful to push it forward. Because they definitely are, you are building a puzzle, right? When you're doing these things.
So before I go to the next question, this is another question that I get a lot from writers, and I think it'd be very helpful to hear from you all. A writer has a script, an Australian writer has a script that takes place in Australia. Should they get a production company in Australia first to come on before they try to get co-production in different territories, or does it not matter?
I mean, I think they should, but there's no rule. It's not 100%, but it does make a lot of sense for that writer. It depends again on the experience of the writer, how much, what their status is in the market. If there's someone who producers will be fighting over globally, will want to work with, then obviously that's a different situation. But if it's an emerging writer or a newer writer who wants to establish a credibility of a project and start to make it real, then finding again the right producer, the right production company is absolutely the best way to start.
Cool, awesome. What are some differences between an international co-production for film and one for television? What are the differences or similarities too?
I think, one very basic difference is if you're co-producing under treaty, then certain instruments like the European Convention don't apply to television drama, they just apply to theatrical features. And so you need to figure out in terms of legislation what you need to look at. If you're co-producing in essence without worrying about qualifying under the treaty, then in reality, I come from the film world and I'm now more focused on high-end television. I haven't really found any great difference in the way that we actually create co-production partnerships to access either creative elements or locations or financial elements. So the process for us from a development and production side hasn't been different really between the two media, but I'd be curious if any of the other panelists have actually found it different between the two in any way.
We're just dipping our toe into that world as well. So yeah, I think that's great. I would love to hear any insight because we've got things that will be in Spanish, bilingual, things that'll take place in America, but will be still bilingual. So we've sort of got a mishmash. Other things that'll be internationally shot that will be in, well, a majority in Spanish or a bilingual Spanish-English, and not necessarily shooting down in Mexico or in South America someplace. So yeah, I'm very curious how that would be. We're just getting our feet wet with that. But so far it hasn't been any different. We're still pitching the same networks, the same, well, not really the broadcast networks, but we're still pitching the Netflix, the Epics, et cetera, of the world.
So there really isn't that many differences. There's that many differences between film and TV co-production.
Yes, the only thing I would say is in the traditional world of financing television with an anchor commission and then potential pre-sales or co-production deals in other territories, and then an MG against or a studio investment against international and soft monies, there is that pressure to decide what your anchor territory is. And so if you have an international show that has elements from more than one territory, you still need to make that decision as to where you actually anchor your show and then kind of build around in a way that's not quite so set or rigid in certainly in independent film. Obviously, if you're actually then making your show for a global streamer, all of that goes away. But if you're piecing together the different elements of the finance kind of jigsaw puzzle style, then there's still an expectation in television that you actually identify what that primary territory is, and a lot of that will depend on where the story is set, where the majority of the characters come from, where the DNA of the creative processes come from in terms of where the writer is based and where the inspiration was drawn out. But it's not always clear cut, and sometimes you have to kind of do it by trial and error to figure out where the show sits most comfortably first, and what becomes the primary territory, and what end up being the kind of co-production bolt-ons to add to that.
With Rosalind?
Got a question there, just leading on from that. I've got a question for Alex, just using Sense8 as an example in relation to what Carlo was saying. Could you tell us a little bit about how that was anchored? Because it's shot in 17 cities. And it'd just be really interesting to hear about that example.
It was so concretely anchored at every minute. We basically had 3 bases, essentially, one in the US and 2 in Europe. And they were our sort of main territories, our main bases really. From those 3 bases, we were able to springboard to full units pretty much in every of the other locations where we film, and take the smallest possible team of cast and HODs with us. So it's, I mean, there's one example there, for example, having in the US and Europe being separated is definitely something that was very valuable for Sense8, because, you know, we were shipping 3-4 camera packages around the world. We were shipping crews, we were shipping props and set deck and costume, and everything had to move. So it was incredibly important that we weren't trying to get everything, you know, it wasn't just one place trying to do it. We were across different time zones. We had to have people locally to be on top of visas in terms of travel permissions, which for some of the actors in particular was incredibly complicated. So it's that whole thing of, you know, strategically having bases that give you the local knowledge and the support that you need was really, really important on Sense8, definitely. And I was going to say, you know, that's you know, that's bases. The idea of, I mean, I was thinking about how many countries sometimes, especially in Europe, on European co-productions, will be part of a European co-production treaty, you know, to get you know, co-producing together on one production, on one film. And you know, that's quite relatively normal for us in European film, because everyone's neighbors and it's quite close together. And most countries in Europe are used to co-producing together. I think that, you know, it was interesting listening to Carlo just now in terms of how for TV, you know, you wouldn't necessarily want to have that many people with a say in the same way. That would get very confusing, I think, and is best avoided. So in TV, you know, TV tends to pull back and have, you know, could have strategic bases, but certainly wouldn't be trying to internationally co-produce with many countries. That would be confusing, and the product would, I'm sure, be worse for it.
Cool. Just a reminder, everybody, if you're going to have questions, put it in the Q&A box, not the chat box, and make sure the questions are something that could benefit everybody. I'm seeing a lot of like project specific questions. So make sure the questions are something that could benefit everybody. Question, with everything going on, obviously with the pandemic, what are some territories that you see are hungrier for content than ever? Are there some territories that producers, writers should be looking at more than other territories? Or
I'll jump in with a couple of countries who I think are good co-producers. I think Belgium and Canada are great co-producers, just because they, you know, because they are so easy to co-produce with, and they're so open to it. So they're not necessarily yelling out for the content, but they have funds in place and crews in place and post-production in place that really makes a co-production efficient and effective. And they're really good at them because they do them all the time, which is also important.
That's so interesting, because one of the questions was, can you talk about why Canada doesn't have more co-pro with the USA? Do they do more internationally, or do they do a lot with the US? They do more internationally?
Yeah.
All of the Canadian treaties are with countries other than the US. They haven't got a treaty with the US. And in fact, all of their treaties are predicated on limiting the number of US elements within the projects they actually allow to access their tax credits and other incentives. So there's a lot of production services going from the States, a lot of American projects which are originated and funded out of the US, which go to shoot in Canada and access the tax credits at production services levels. But there is no ability to have the same kind of equal official co-production that we from the UK can have with Canada, for instance, or the vast majority of countries around the world, because Canada, I think, has the greatest numbers of co-production treaties of any other territory, and are very sophisticated about it.
Interesting.
You know, everyone may disagree, so I feel like this may be slightly controversial to even say, except I'll just say, you know, because each country wants a say and you want to be represented, I do think that there is an American elitism in the projects they produce with Canada, because they want them to feel American. We just want to take advantage of the tax credit. So, you know, Toronto needs to be New York, and Vancouver needs to be wherever. Everything just needs to be somewhere else. So, but if you're doing a real co-production, you know, Canada wants to be represented. as well as America. And I think that there is this, kind of an attitude about, well, we can take advantage of the country, but we actually don't want it to feel Canadian. That has for a long time been, but it's totally different if you want to do something with Germany. Great. But I do think that there's this, this sense of their stuff isn't as good as ours. And I do think that crosses over. That
makes sense. Glen, Janet, should we just move to Italy? What are we doing here? Let's just move to Italy. Let's just go over there. Okay, next question, because I feel like this, when it comes to international co-production, this is where I could maybe wrap my head around the most to start. But in terms of government, soft money, government finances, tax credits from the government, how does that affect the overall production, and how much say does that entity have? So let's say the Irish government puts money in. Do they have like the final word, as we were saying before? How does that change things?
I mean, most of those subsidy systems are spend related. So in reality, if you're benefiting from the Irish system or the UK tax credits or the Canadian tax credits, there's no editorial control that comes from those local governments above and beyond the fact that they give you a set of points, usually, that you need to tick in order to show that you're drawing enough elements from that particular territory to qualify for the incentives. And then you need to spend a minimum amount of your budget in percentage terms on elements of that territory. And there'll be rules that tell you what counts and what doesn't. But it'd be based on a minimum level of activity with a benefit that's proportional to the actual spend you incur on elements of that country, rather than the government saying, oh, let's have a look at this edit and tell you what I like and what I don't like. I mean, it doesn't stretch to that kind of level of investment or control. I mean, obviously, if you're dealing with other entities, if you're dealing with, say, the BFI here in the UK, and they're investing equity, which is state supported, but it's still equity, into a feature film, they will have a voice, as will BBC Films or Film for the money that they actually consider to be a risk investment, and they will want to have input in the editorial alongside everyone else within the lineup that has that right and that voice, and it'll end up being a collegiate decision with some kind of mechanism to determine what happens if people disagree. But in terms of the actual spend-based subsidies like the tax credits, that's a mechanical spend-based system. So it's simpler on the one side and drier on the other. But
that's really interesting. Any other insights to that?
No, I was just going to add, but I don't want to explain it because it's so detailed, and I love hearing Carlo talk. Maybe you could briefly explain like what the point system is, because I'm not sure lots of people really understand, how the actors, the top two actors, one needs to be, let's just say Canadian if it's Canada, half the directors, how that actually works.
Sure. I mean, it changes from country to country, but here in the UK, for instance, you need to reach a minimum number of points out of the allocation that you give to your writer, your director, your lead cast, where you're shooting location-wise, where you're posting, where you're carrying out visual effects, where you're recording the score. And for as long as, and I think still, actually, this hasn't changed, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's yet been impacted on by Brexit, but pre-Brexit in the UK, any European elements would gain you points because we're part of the European Union, and that hasn't been changed yet. Similarly, with the European Convention, if you want to qualify as a European film under the European Convention, you've got 18 points, out of which you need to achieve 15, and out of those, those points will be allocated. For instance, 3 points will go to the screenwriter because that's considered to be a really crucial, a key artistic element within the co-production. 3 points will be allocated to the director, 3 points will be allocated to the lead actor by number of shooting days, and then everything else will kind of follow from that. So you see very quickly that you can afford to lose one of those elements, one of those 3 key elements, and allocate that to a non-European, be that US, Canadian, Australian, wherever. But then if you've done that, you can't afford to lose any other points, otherwise you don't qualify. So it's really a way to ensure that above and beyond spending part of your production budget on elements of a particular country or territory, you also reflect in the creative choices in front and behind the camera and in the DNA of the story, the nature of the territory that's actually giving you the reliefs. And so points will be given, for instance, to not just shooting location, but location of the story, nationality of the characters, really looking at the DNA of the story that you bring onto the screen, as well as where you're going to be spending your money, as a bit of a balance between the two sides.
And that's really where it gets fun.
Yes, well, crazy. That's where we end up loving anyone who has a double passport.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's how you cast. It's how, well, what about,
Yeah, that's right. Into waiting qualifying. Sorry, Janet.
Oh, no, I apologize. Yeah. Go ahead.
Go on. No,
okay. I was wondering, because we were exploring shooting in either, I guess it was Hungary or Romania. It seemed like they were 30% across the board. They were pretty lenient in who you could bring in or even local. There were some things like, oh, they don't have great wardrobe houses or something. So for instance, we were looking at a project that would have been World War II era Paris, right? So you can shoot in those countries because they still have actual practical backdrops for that. And a lot of productions have gone there, but it seemed pretty friendly as far as across the board, bringing people in. It wasn't as concerning as other countries where you had to have, is it still the same? I'm just wondering, because this was pre-pandemic, and then pandemic shut down a lot of our conversations, plus the fact that I think they were busy for an entire year over in those two countries for what we would have needed, but it seemed pretty friendly. So hence the reason a lot of production had gone there.
Huh.
I think so. I mean, they're all competing, remember, for they all want you to come to them, and ultimately they have made their incentives and their terms as attractive as they can possibly get away with at government level in terms of or European level. There's a lot of ratification that goes on in terms to make sure that no one is crazily ahead of the one or the other, especially in Europe. It's regulated. So you and Hungary has one of the best deals on the table, because also Hungarian crew can also you can get tax credit on them working outside Hungary if you decide to take some of your crew with them. There are various, there are some incentives that are incredibly easy to use, and really they should all be easy to use, because there's no point in a convoluted scheme. Some have caps on them. The UK doesn't have a cap on it. For example, you can spend as much as you want. You can bring as many actors to the UK as you want to. And with the percentage, the 25% of 80% of their fees qualifies towards your tax credit that you're getting in the UK without any limit at all, irrespective of how many cast you bring in. So there's an incredible, they're all after your project. Eastern European studios are, by the way, as busy as everywhere else in the world. It's not like they're queuing up. You have to queue up to get in anywhere right now, which is phenomenal. But they've been doing it for many, many years, and they do it really well. And again, working with the right producers and making sure you've got good stages and good crews, making sure you've got the A crew or the B crew, and not the D or the E if they even exist in some countries. Those factors definitely apply.
Can I just say, I'm obsessed with this panel.
Right.
This is amazing. I'm learning so much. This is awesome. Okay, I'm gonna ask 2 more questions off the list, because we have so many questions from the audience. We're definitely not gonna get through all of them, but I'll try to get through at least a few of them. But okay, so what would you say are the challenges that international co-productions face as a result of Brexit? Are co-productions with the UK still possible going forward?
A resounding yes, they are still possible, because essentially Brexit is we're still working out the actual, what Brexit really means in terms of on the ground. But what we do know is that certain things in terms of travel, in terms of moving crew around to the UK and back to Europe, like we did in the old previously, that's changed. That's more regulated. That's not we're not one block anymore. So, but absolutely, UK is still open for business, and Europe is too. So there's no question about that. I think it's important to be clear.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, I think that was on a lot of people's minds when that was all happening and is happening. Is there a particular budget range that tends to be ideal for international co-pro projects, or do they vary?
I think it could be, studios are looking to shoot and get that kind of credit, because then they can probably spend more, have bigger budgets, because they'll get a lot of it back. But I think for us more practical minded people that actually look at spending money and putting it up on screen, not in people's pockets, except for ours at some point, but not up front. But, we look at it as just a benefit. You get more out of it. You can go in with something that you're sort of guesstimating it at between 10 and 15 million. I don't even know if we say that as much anymore, but it's like we can actually practically get there. It still takes a lot of maneuvering, but we can actually make those movies, because that tends to be what we do. We're just those are the stories we gravitate towards. So that's what we make. Others do the big ones, but they benefit as well. I think it's across the board for it.
Yeah, I think definitely no rule on how much the budget could be, because projects vary. But what is true is that a co-production does cost money. So you are creating two or more of everything. You've got two producers, two production companies, two crews potentially, and then there's the legal fees as well to factor in, and there's probably the travel to factor in as well between the two countries. So there's just to be aware that co-production isn't necessarily right for every single project. It's one of the questions you should ask yourself early on.
One of the things we haven't mentioned yet is the fact that clearly, particularly as if you're the originator of a project and you bring it to another company to co-produce, you are going to have to cut them in, understandably. So there is a sharing of fees, a sharing of budgeted entitlements for the producers that clearly you're going to need to share with your new partners. And so certainly from our side, we tend to be very comfortable doing that when the size of the project supports it, but it can be a little bit harder to do it on the very small projects for no reason other than when you look at what you're then left with, there might just not be enough to justify the time and effort that everyone's going to have to put into working on. We all know that small projects sometimes take even more effort than the medium to large ones, and certainly they take just as much. So to make sure that those economies of scale are respected, one also has to remember, you end up likely getting a project made rather than not getting it made, but you get it made by owning 30, 40, 50% of it rather than 100% of it. And you need to be quite clear with yourself about what that is worth to you and whether it's worth the exercise.
I love that. Question, if let's say a writer has an idea of co-production before they even write a script, what are some elements that they should avoid in the story? Like, I believe in China, they're not really big on supernatural. I could be wrong, or ghost. But is there anything that you could talk about in specific territories that it's a strict no, we don't want anything to do with this because it has this in the story?
And that's excuse me. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Janet. Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, for us, I don't know if we encourage somebody to think like that when creating something. I think it's got to be organic to the story. It has to make sense. If it just feels like, oh, I'm going to make this character this nationality because that would be a great co-production thing, that just feels like, oh, that's nice. That's called labeling. And we don't want to do that. Let's make it organic to something. So, I mean, like I mentioned, we were looking at Hungary and Romania for something. It's because the project was originated as a germ of an idea of these writers. They wanted to write this project because they read this story and blah, blah, blah. And it became that. So I would say try and just continue to write amazing stories, and it'll organically evolve into the right construct of what it should be.
Yeah, it's a little the cart before the horse. I don't think
Yeah.
you set out to make an international co-production. I think once you start to work on your idea, if it's organic, that is a way to get it made and a way to get it funded. But I don't think you set out to do that.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Unless
Sorry.
you do.
Yeah. I guess I don't know. I guess it'd make this more complicated to sort, as a writer, start thinking about that cart before the horse. Okay, let's get to the questions from the audience, because there's 1,000,005. So again, we're gonna get through a few of them. I have to say, for somebody coming into this who knew so much little about this, I just thought like a lot of people didn't, but these questions are so amazing. I'm very impressed. Okay, this is from Roxanne. Hi, Roxanne. Her question has to do with whether foreign producers feel free to work with WGA writers. I've heard this answered with a big yes or no, depending on what country it is.
I mean, again, from my personal experience with the companies I've worked with so far, we've never had an issue with working with WGA writers. We are just very aware of the fact that the economics of a WGA deal are very different from the economics of a writer deal we can do here in the UK. And so the project has to support it and we have to be able to fund it. Sometimes it's about being able to find the money to be able to pay a WGA writer what they legitimately expect. And sometimes it's a case of figuring out whether that development is fitting in terms of what you're going to be investing into it with the size of project you're building, and therefore ultimately it's all going to make sense and stack up as you hopefully move into production. There are some, certainly in the television space, there can be some of our more traditional broadcasters here in the UK that will bulk at the size of a WGA deal. You're not going to get ITV to fund a WGA writer for your commission, but as long as you know where you're going to be able to find that kind of support, it sometimes reduces your chances of as to the number of conversations you can have, but there is no restriction other than that very practical one of being able to make that WGA deal make sense.
I think in general, American talent is really expensive and perhaps thought of as they're overpaid across the board.
Or conversely, we a lot of my British writer friends will tell you they're very significantly underpaid.
Yeah, or they're underpaid. Yes. The studios and producers feel like the American talent's overpaid. Certainly not the talent themselves.
Yeah,
they love it.
Yeah, sure. How do we see this from Edwin? How do we see international co-production between Asia and Europe or USA? How open are they with co-production? Or do we not talk about Asia?
I can't speak to it personally.
Very ignorant about Asia.
My experience with Asia has been co-financing, as in working with a local company or setting up an SPV, a company of our own in that country, and working directly, possibly having their support with accessing regional incentives, which do exist in Asia, but certainly not so much experience of actually sort of co-production treaty with Asia. But it does exist and it does happen, and there are plenty of Asian countries with treaties. So yes.
Cool. Other than The Queen's Gambit, have there been many shows produced overseas where the locations were representing US locations? Can we name a few? Which ones, Carlo?
Gosh, I mean, I think most of the shows that I'm aware of that are set in the US are actually shot somewhere else.
Oh, wow.
We do this all the time.
Yeah. And it can be.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking about the ones that I've been involved in. Obviously Canada is a very obvious one, but also we've shot the US in Hungary, we shot the US in Wales, we've shot the US in Prague, we shot the US quite often in the UK, or London often, and other parts of the UK. It's pretty frequent, again, just by virtue of the fact that, particularly in the olden days, before some of the American states started having tax credits of their own, if you wanted to access soft monies, you had to go elsewhere. Now you've had Louisiana for a long time, and other states in the US that offer support also, but that wasn't always the case. And for certain types of stories and locations, you still can't find a place with the right level of support if you want to get soft monies into your finance plan within the States, and so you need to go elsewhere.
By the way, everybody, that is a Beverly Hills dog in Janet's box. This is what you call a Beverly Hills dog. Spoiled and lovely and gorgeous. Obsessed. Okay, Judith asks, you mentioned that Germany is different than Canada and US relations. Can you elaborate? Oh, so I think I broke up for a second. You mentioned that Germany is different. Oh, well, one person mentioned that Germany is different than Canada and US relations. Could you elaborate?
I'm not sure. I mean, Germany is a great place to co-produce with. Germany's fantastic, and we've filmed US in Germany before as well. Just for while we're on that previous subject, Germany's incredible because it's got lots of different Bundesländer states that all have their, pretty much all have their own funding structure within the regions of the whole country, as well as national tax credits about, being available as well for film and TV. So that's a very different, setup, if you like, to the US that doesn't have, the co-production treaties, that isn't culturally linked with other countries in the same way, and Canada, which is. And is much. Canada and Germany actually work very well together, just like the UK and Canada. And you'll have seen quite a few films, I'm sure, that have been made in those two countries, across those two countries.
Can I ask a question? This is a paranoid question. I'm hearing a lot about US locations being shot elsewhere. US maybe considered elitist towards other territories. Is there a general feeling that maybe, in terms of co-production, America is further down the list of what to look at, or no?
I just want to address the elitist thing. My point was more from a creative standpoint, why I don't think Americans look to Canada and say, let's co-produce, as opposed to finance something, but I don't want it to look like anything. That's totally different than an international show where half the show is in Spanish and half is in English. That was my point. And that's why I think, I do think it's changing, but you don't see as much of that. When I was at CBS, we had a show that was a Canadian production called Ransom, and we licensed it for virtually nothing because it meant so much to the Canadian production company and to Canada for it to air in America. That was the only value for them. But we did not allow them to say constable. We said, you have to say policeman. And they're like, well, no, we need to say constable because it airs here too. Well, we don't care. It's set in America. We didn't want them to show the Toronto Space Needle. When they would show the skyline of Toronto, we would say, we don't want to see the Space Needle. It needs to feel generic. And so we had all of these, and this was our design because we felt like the American audience was not interested in watching a Canadian show. Now, we never said what city it was filmed in, but we wanted it to feel American. And that was more my point. It's not about co-productions per se. It really is just the American-Canadian relationship in terms of how I think the American audience sees it.
Got it. Cool. Okay. This is from Amita. Have any of the panelists produced or collaborated in India?
We have several things in early development, but yes, we are with a Mumbai-based director who has a creative team, and she's done some work on film and television, does have a television show on Amazon. So we are in process, and being it's right now in a creative stage, it's challenging, I'd say, only because I think of all the things we sort of have touched upon here is the cultural differences. Being female and American, we're pretty able to get away with a lot of things as females here in America, and they can't do that in India. So it's putting on a different headspace, I would say, as far as cultural differences. But it's also just, it's been a challenge with the languages as well, because in one case, there's a writer that is writing in Hindi, and we've been trying to navigate that. So we're trying to find our voice in it, is what I'll say right now. And then we would shoot some in Mumbai for sure, but it's an international project that then would shoot someplace else that the hopes would be in America, but it would probably be Canada, to be honest with you, because of all the reasons we said anyways. But yeah, right now we're definitely there in the creative process. And in a lot of these things, we generically talk about the Amazons and the Netflix of the world, to be honest. So with India being so large, the outreach would just make absolute sense for us to look at those platforms to make something with them.
I would highly recommend India, Janet, as well. It's we had a great experience on Sense8. It was fantastic, really amazing. And I guess we went in. We had pre-existing relationships with producers and production companies in quite a few of the different places we went to on Sense8, but India we didn't have at that point. We teamed up with a great company called India Take One Productions, and so I guess as a result of not knowing the country, not having worked there before, we were incredibly thorough with our preparation, and maybe more than we put so much attention into getting it right up front, and that really paid off. That was incredible, really was, and it's a beautiful place to be, beautiful place to film.
If you need a location scout, I've never done it before, but I will go and take pictures with my phone and just send it to you. I'm going to go there. Okay, so I think we have time for maybe 3 more questions. So interesting enough, Morris, you put it in the chat box, but this is my next question. Any appetite for African stories or working with African production companies? Yeah.
I mean, South Africa is definitely a big place for a lot of people to shoot. I know for sure. That's just been the most experience I've had in discussing with those companies over there for potential co-productions and shooting over there. It was in South Africa.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, South Africa as a services place we've actually used very often. I think there's definitely much more interest now in finding genuine African stories from African talent that you can shoot in Africa for Africa, rather than, again, South Africa, providing a backdrop for the States or London or Vancouver or wherever else. I haven't done one yet, and I think it's we're all starting to navigate that quite with a lot of interest, but with a lot to learn in that process, because the industry there is quite varying from state to state. But I don't know whether Alex, you've had any experience actually shooting there outside South Africa or
Kenya, which was a really amazing experience as well. Beautiful locations, which completely worked for what we needed in terms of being on the ground there. But also we were benefiting from an amazing project that's going on there, which in Nairobi, which is that crews are being trained up through this amazing scheme that Tom Tikva runs called One Fine Day to make indigenous local productions of their own. And then they worked on our production as well, sort of with the experience that they had, and they learned obviously with us and from us at the same time. And then now they go back to making their own productions. And there's a really special relationship there, an emerging industry in Kenya where there are a couple of really good local producers with incredible experience who work on that project over there.
That's amazing to hear.
No.
That's truly amazing.
Can you imagine filming in Kenya? That's amazing. I'm so jealous. That is so cool. This is Frank, this is a great question. Are there genres that are more demand at this time for co-production? I've heard that comedy is harder, but tell us what genres are the most in demand. Or basically anything besides comedy or action.
Probably.
Basically, yeah, right?
Or horror. I wouldn't say any horror. I think that's a bit different, but yeah, comedy. It's just not funny to ours isn't funny to them, and theirs this may not be as funny too.
Well, I always say when I'm giving notes to especially new writers on comedies, what moves us is much more universal. The birth of a baby, the death of a parent. What makes us laugh is so unique and specific.
So true.
I think it's very difficult to translate. So whenever I give thoughts on a comedy script, I never say, well, I think this is actually really funny or this isn't funny. I only talk about story, because what actually makes someone laugh is very unique. So it doesn't surprise me that comedy is not as big internationally as drama.
That's really interesting. This is from Thiago from Brazil. Hi, Thiago. In your experience, how open are global streamers to taking limited territorial rights?
You mean to giving up?
Yeah, are they giving it up? Yeah, I'm sorry. That was...
We'll say giving it up.
Well, streamers have the rights in the territories. I mean, that's their point, is that they're trying to be global. So I'm not sure I understand the question.
I guess if I understand it correctly, you will have the Netflixers and the Amazons buying only certain territorial rights in certain projects, but that's usually when the projects come to them already with either distributors or broadcasters attached, and therefore some territories have been taken out of the equation.
And they don't want to carve out any territories.
Ideally, they want it all, but if they want the project enough and some territories have gone, but they can actually get enough of the rest, they'll take it. But it tends to be a function of how much they actually want that content if they're prepared to negotiate on it.
And it might jeopardize your deal or significantly reduce your deal if you were trying to hold on to certain territories. You'd have to weigh that up.
You're not carving out Brazil or India,
No.
Germany. Like those are really tough places to carve out.
Rosa,
maybe the UK.
UK. Rosa, were you going to say something? I thought you unmuted yourself for a sec.
Sorry?
Oh, I thought you unmuted yourself. I thought you were going to say.
Frozen.
No, you're good. You're
no,
good.
I thought you said I'm frozen. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think you're going to say something. It's all good. Okay, so this is from anonymous attendee. Has anyone had experience working with production teams in the Middle East?
I've not.
No, sorry.
Again, there are, Jordan is an amazing place to film, and we've all seen, The Martian, and we've all seen Star Wars. Look at those beautiful locations of Wadi Rum. The deserts there are just spectacular, and you don't have to actually do much to them. They are the backdrop. You don't have to bring much. Highly recommend. There's some great companies there and incentives as well. And in the Emirates, there are emerging production companies, service production companies that can handle your film. So yes.
I wasn't with Howard and Alex when they shot Homeland, which was shot all over the world, but especially in the Middle East. But people don't tend to share positive stories. They usually only tend to share the nightmares. While they were such great partners, is not usually what you hear when you talk about stories. They're not as much fun when you're having a martini.
That's right.
Awesome. This is interesting. Documentaries. Is that changed? Can we show, this person asked, and I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name. She also wants to find out, or he wants to find out if documentaries are in demand. And is there just kind of a little bit you want to talk about how a documentary co-production is looked at? Is it set up differently?
Docs are often co-produced, though. That's very normal in the doc world. Often, it might be a slightly different platform, but and it's certainly not a requirement. But often, to put the financing together on documentary, you need multiple broadcasters, and you need multiple sources of finance to get it across the line. So, absolutely, and docs are enjoyed. Docs, we're all watching docs more than ever before. They're enjoying, ever since Fahrenheit 9/11, documentaries have been flying higher and higher.
But talk about no money for a lot of work.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Carlo's earlier point, they're almost not worth it. I know, because I have a documentary on Netflix that is about the pandemic, and I think I made way less than minimum wage based on the amount of hours that we put into it.
That's
I can so there's some questions going in both of those. Amir says, is London too expensive for CoPro? Do you think is that a good place to look at?
I was going to say for a martini.
Definitely. Say for what?
Everything.
Too expensive for what?
It's just is London too expensive, or is it better to go to different regions? I guess in terms of London or the surrounding regions of London in terms of CoPro.
I would always look everywhere. Find the best place for your project. It's not there's no one rule. It's interesting because quite a few of the questions have been sort of very quite yes or no binary questions. Co-production is the opposite of binary. It's very much about finding the bespoke solution to solve your particular problem, and it's your situation, which is a situation which evolves as the production grows. So you're often, maybe London was the right place at the beginning, but then you didn't. Then you did choose to go somewhere else. It's possible to make a low budget production, to spend less in every country. It's possible to spend more in every country. So it's about speaking to the right producers and production companies in those countries to get them to give you a steer on it if you don't know them already.
Awesome. Cool. I'm looking at these other questions and I'm trying to like dissect some of them. Just don't ask how to get in touch with them or like stuff like that. But Amita asked, this is interesting. I feel like the answer is going to be contractual, but what happens if one party has financing? If one party is bringing finance to the plate, do they automatically contractually get more stake or more say in it? Or is it still dependent, case by case?
I guess the question is, what does the other party bring then? Because if the other party brings the talent that secured that financing, then clearly both sides have got quite a lot to bargain with. And then you would look at what that translates into in terms of the balance in the relationship. But I think that's the first question to understand. I mean, clearly, if you're bringing all of the finance to the table for a project, you would expect to have quite a loud voice in the mix, unless there's something equally valuable coming from the other side, whatever that might be.
Also, we lost Roslyn for a sec. By the way, Glen, I'm sorry I'm saying this person's name wrong. Linda Weiss says, I enjoyed the pandemic documentary, Glen.
Oh, thank you.
What was the name of it?
Pandemic.
There we go. You remember.
When I was at CBS, I wanted to find a medical version of Making a Murderer, and I tasked one of the documentary film producers who had a drama on CBS to come up with it. And he pitched me a bunch of ideas and I didn't buy any of them. And when I left, I said, let's keep working on this. And we ended up selling this to Netflix in 2018 and shot it all over the world, about the front care health workers and scientists and everyone on the front lines who are trying to prevent the next 100-year pandemic. And we sold it on the anniversary of the 1918 Spanish flu. We delivered it in September of 2019, and they gave us an air date of January of 2020, just because it's the height of the flu season in the Northern Hemisphere. We, of course, had no idea of what was actually happening in Wuhan in late fall.
Wow.
We knew about it. We actually knew about it in December because the New York Times journalists who we were working with told us, oh, it's actually going to happen next month. This is what I know. And I thought, oh, come on. We kept saying it's going to happen, but it's not really going to happen, is it? And of course it did.
You know what? I'm going to put some questions coming in that's really interesting. But to Alex's point, I wanted to make sure that it's not just yes, no. I would love, because I love what you just said. Can the panelists go around the room and maybe talk about one of their projects that they did or they're planning on doing, and just talk a little bit about the obstacles that you faced and that you feel can benefit anybody else. So what did you learn that you wish that you knew prior to that obstacle?
The obstacle of the pandemic, or what obstacle?
No, just in general, just like an obstacle, like trying to go into a co-pro internationally, and something that you learned that you feel that everybody should learn from. I think that'd be really interesting.
Well, I had mentioned Greta before, but I never thought you could shoot everything in Ireland to get away with New York. I think we did okay. We shot 2 days in New York, but I think it was just putting together this amazing team that everybody put something in for it, and it was getting the right partners, and it was just amazing. It was really amazing what you could do, and I couldn't believe that we pulled it off for the amount of money that we didn't have. that we actually made the movie, and it came in just slightly under budget and right on time. I mean, it was phenomenal. I guess it also helps that you have a pro like Neil Jordan as a director, but that was pretty phenomenal to see that put together, because it always felt like it was going to fall apart.
That's such a cool movie.
Thanks.
But yeah. Any other learning that you want to impart, that you faced, that you want to tell everybody? Going once, going twice. You're like,
Yes,
let them figure it out. No, what are you saying?
Sorry, if you want one more bit of contribution, I guess one thing I learned from one of the TV shows that I've been working on over the past 3 years, which coming in from the independent film world, I had this tendency to try to be over clever when putting international co-productions together and kind of look at every piece you can find from everywhere, and quite often overcomplicate things, because in the film world genuinely often that was the difference between getting a film up and running and made and not getting it made. It was very educational for me to actually go through this television series, which is a UK, Austrian, German co-production, where again, as we approached the first season of it, we looked at lots of options for Vienna, which is where the show is set. It's called Vienna Blood. It's on PBS in the States. Because we obviously thought Vienna is really expensive. We all know that in European terms, it's one of those beautiful capitals where people live very well if they have a lot of money, and there's limited crew, and if you need to bring a lot of people in, it's going to be really expensive to house them and all of that. And so we started looking at a lot of options, particularly in Eastern Europe, to shoot some of the bulk of the show somewhere that might be cheaper and with tax credits. And in the end, we were very lucky that the Austrian government felt that as a genuinely an English language TV show genuinely set in Vienna, they wanted to retain us there, and they wanted us to showcase Vienna for everything that it has to offer. So they actually enabled us to access some subsidies from the Austrian Film Fund and some subsidies from the Vienna Film and Television Fund to make it worth our while staying in the capital. And what we learned by doing that is that actually the non-financial value we got by being true to the nature of the story and really being able to make the location one of the characters in the story was way beyond what we would have saved if we'd actually taken it away. And sometimes you might have to resist that temptation to continue to play the game just for the sake of playing the game, because we're all used to trying to be really smart with the way we put the pieces together and look at what you've got in front of you. And if that's the most creatively valuable piece, you embrace it and you try and find a way to make it work. And so, by gently blackmailing the Austrian government into retaining us there by giving us enough money to be able to shoot in Vienna, we were able to do what we ultimately all felt was creatively the best solution for the show. And it took a little bit of kind of going around the houses to come to that conclusion, but sometimes simpler, it can actually be better. And that was definitely a lesson for me, just from the much more guerrilla frame of mind that comes with.
That's great producing right there, Carlo. They are, like I mentioned, they're all trying to attract productions to them, and the incentive is there for a reason. It's to incentivize you to come to them. So they do want you to spend as much as you can there. They want you to use their crews as much as they can. You use their hotels, their restaurant. It's an the economic effect argument is something that you can actually have with funders, and it's a conversation. It's not just simple. One thing and challenges I would just warn: quite a few countries are now getting incentives for the first time. Or are changing their incentives, maybe opening them up. If they haven't run, before, and you're the first, that can be quite hairy, because some commissions and countries are amazing at turning around tax incentive payments really fast, and they're super professional and super efficient, and they've been doing it for years. Others who haven't had the experience can take an incredible amount of time, and that leaves you hanging, because that's money that you were counting on coming in. So really doing a due diligence on what the available finance is and whether the system is working is a very important thing to be thinking of.
I love it. Well, we're just approaching the end. So I guess the very, very last question, because this is usually a question that's asked: how does a writer or producer actually reach out to these international production companies? What advice would you give somebody that is starting to look at different companies? Sorry, my dog is barking, alerting me that it's almost over. But any kind of parting advice about any writer or up and coming producer that's starting to hit the ground and market their project?
I'd say do your research. I think it's really important that you spend a little bit of time figuring out who is who out there, what they've done, how they work, whether ultimately they're a right fit for what you need. Some companies really like to co-produce. Some companies are willing to be minority co-producers. Other companies will just take a project on if they're equal partners. Some companies don't co-produce at all. And so rather than doing the scattergun approach of kind of coming to everyone in a territory, pick the 3 or 4 companies that you think are the right ones for you, and let them know why you think they're the right ones for you, and make them feel that you've really thought about it and that you're coming to them for a reason. And then hopefully let the quality of your work speak for themselves. Because I mean, we're all always hunting for the best possible project out there. So having something really interesting to say with your project, goes a very, very long way. I think if you can couple it with a sense that you're coming to speak to me or Alex or Glen or Janet for the right reasons, because you know who we are, what we've done, what our companies do, and you think that can be a fit, that ticks a very big box, because it makes it sound like it's not going to be a complete waste of time to take the meeting or have the phone call. And to me, that goes, but if I can see those two sides satisfied, then I'll talk to anyone.
Cool. I love it. Everybody, thank you so much. Rosalind, stay on for a bit. Everybody listening, stay on for a bit. Panelists, thank you so much. This was amazing. I learned so much. My head's just like pulsating right now. Everybody, thank you so much. And we will talk soon. But Rosalind, everybody listening, stay on for a sec. We'll do like just a quick wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Janet, Alex, and Glen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.